Hey everybody, this is James Lindsay and you are listening to the new Discourses podcast. And today we're going to talk about where communism came from. We all know it's from Karl Marx, right? No, it's older than Karl Marx. And Karl Marx was an important figure in the development of communism. That's no doubt. He, along with Friedrich Engels, wrote the document that came to be called the Communist Manifesto. And that was based off of another document that was written in part by them and in part by Moses Hess called the Communist Confession of Faith. And we've covered that here on the New Discourses podcast. So Karl Marx is usually associated with the creation of communism, but he's not. He's much more a popularizer of communism and a very significant advancer of communist theory. And it's not even all of communism, by the way, that Marx really developed. It is something called revolutionary communism, which means that you are going to have a revolution in order to install communism, or actually to install a political, economic, and social system that will eventually become communism when enough people have been transformed back, allegedly, into socialists. And so the question is, where did these ideas come from? Now, there's a pretty rampant accusation all over the internet, all over history since the probably mid-19th century, that in fact it came from the Jews. That the Jews invented communism, that communism is a Jewish formula. Of course, the Nazis, for example, but also the communists, accused capitalism of being a Jewish formula as well. So that's not right. In fact, it's completely wrong, although there are some hard elements that maybe are worth bringing up in kind of the background. I'm going to read in this episode two documents that are really at the roots of revolutionary communism, or communism as we understand it in the world today. These documents directly inspired either Karl Marx or the people who inspired Karl Marx. So there's like a chain of inspiration here. And so these two documents are going to be very important, but let's deal with some of this various and sundry. There's also, by the way, a book out there by a man named Richard Poe that accuses the British of having invented communism effectively as a intelligence operation, and then blamed the Jews for this in order to get the fingerprints off of themselves. I think there are some compelling arguments in this book. I do not think it is correct. I think that communism predates British manipulation and invention, although there is likely to be some British intelligence activity as well as German activity in the establishment of the communist state that is the Soviet Union in 1917. That itself is its own complicated story because Lenin was actually in Germany and was sent during World War I back to Russia in order to destabilize the Tsar and create advantage for the Central Powers. And what you ended up with, what caused the Soviet Union, by the way, is largely World War I. Things were bad, and the Bolsheviks came along with this promise of this threefold promise: peace, land, and bread. And it really resonated with people who didn't have peace, didn't have land, and didn't have bread. And so the incredible poverty and post-war shock and the failure of the very actually unjust Tsarist regime to be able to deal with that problem was part of what led to that. But that's the installation of a communist state. That's not the ideas of communism. And I'm off in weeds I don't need to get into. I'm just frustrated, honestly, with all of this nonsense, claiming that this was a Jewish program. So just real quick, why were so many of the Bolsheviks Jews? First of all, they weren't. They were disproportionately many, but there weren't so many of them. It was like 5%. It's not actually most of them. But the reason is kind of a lot of things, if you need to know. One of them is that the Tsar was super anti-Semitic and did terrible things and blamed the Jews. That's where the protocols of the Elders of Zion came from, for example. And a lot of the early anti-Zionist project came from was to basically blame Jews for things, and they were subjected to pogroms and all kinds of injustices as second-class citizens in Russia. And a lot of them were like anything's got to be better than this, so some of them joined the Bolsheviks. They were also disproportionately in the professional classes in cities, which is where the Bolsheviks were primarily recruiting their vanguard. But even so, it was only like 5%. It wasn't even close to a majority, and it's very far from true to say that it is a Jewish strategy or Jewish plot. Okay, now I'm still in the weeds. Let's talk about the more difficult stuff, and then we're going to get down to the ideological stuff. So something happened in Europe. I don't actually know all the details of this yet. As many of you know, I'm friends with Mike O'Fallon. I know that Mike O'Fallon is doing research on this right now and knows quite a bit more about it than I do, so I'll just kind of defer to him for the moment. But something happened after the First Crusade. So we're talking about like 12th century or 11th century now. We're going way back in time in Europe. So after the First Crusade, a bunch of the Crusaders came back, many of them to Provence in France, and they came back with weird mystical ideas that spawned a ton of weird mysticism in Europe. It's like the first influx of a major Hermetic, Gnostic, and magical, mystical infusion into European thought, especially kind of at the higher levels. You can say whatever you want about the Crusaders that brought these ideas back, but you can't say they were Jewish. You have to admit that they were Catholic. Okay, so the Catholic Crusaders brought back, probably from all the various, Near Eastern tribes and cults and so on, different mystical beliefs. These spawned things like all kinds of lines of mysticism. Christian mysticism, what is kind of like the precursors of New Age mysticism, although in a very different form. Alchemy, a lot of alchemy, mostly probably brought in from North Africa. Even the lines that became known as Kabbalah in Jewish thinking come from this origin point. That's controversial to say, by the way. But the Zohar, which is where that originates, was composed after this, in line with this. And so it is what it is. Like it or not, these seem to be the facts. So something happened to bring mysticism into Europe in Provence after the First Crusade. That's somehow relevant. And what I'm really about to do is just kind of address this mystical component of communism before I get into the actual stuff that matters, which is what's in these two documents, which is not mystical, by the way, at all. It's totally social, political, and economic theory. Really bad social, political, and economic theory. It's not mystical at all. Okay, so at any rate, lots of secret societies, lots of people in the nobility dabbling with these mystical beliefs, these secrets. You get Jewish Kabbalah, you get Christian Kabbalah, say it right, James. And so you get a lot of this stuff. Whatever. Centuries go by, alchemy, mysticism, and so on are rife throughout Europe too. And then eventually you have the infusion, I think, in the 12th or 13th century, but certainly by the 15th century of Hermeticism, the Hermetic text, the Corpus Hermeticum gets translated into Latin in, the 15th century in Italy. And this, whether it's like Swedenborg, by the time you get to the 18th and 19th centuries, whether we're looking at like Swedenborg, you're looking at influences on Rousseau in the 18th century, whether you're looking at whatever weird stuff was going on at the Tübingen Stift, following people like the teaching of Jakob Boehme in Germany, who went on to create this whole mystical thing that got appropriated by this Lutheran seminary in Tübingen. You have a lot of mysticism happening, and a lot of this got incorporated into the thinking that became Marxism. As it turns out, here's the hard part. Some of that is rooted in Kabbalah. Some of it is rooted in the idea in Kabbalah of Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is basically going around and repairing the world. It is this, you've probably heard this if you're kind of circulating on social media a lot in circles around ours, that the true narrative or grammar of communism is a narrative or grammar of withdrawal of God from or whatever, goodness, totality, wholeness from the world, a withdrawal, which causes a rupture, which causes the divine sparks to be scattered, which then begins a repair process. So this grammar of withdrawal, rupture, and repair, that is Kabbalistic thinking. Okay, so the Tikkun Olam that you may have also heard of is the process of repair. Now, in Jewish Kabbalah, which is its own mystical strain that ends up getting significantly developed in the 1500s, 16th century by a guy named Isaac Luria, who is pretty widely respected in certain sects of Judaism today, but not all. Isaac Luria develops this. The idea actually is that you are working as kind of a worldly companion to God to repair the broken world that was broken by his withdrawal to the heavenly realm. And you do so by keeping the commandments, the 613 mitzvot of the Torah, and you do so by doing generally good deeds and by generally being a good person. That's the magic. You go around and you do what you're supposed to, and it has a greater significance even than just the covenantal story in the Torah. It's actually a process with you working with God in order to restore the world that through this cosmic accident or calamity of rupture is now in a broken state. Okay. As it turns out, there are some shysters who ran with this. Sabbatai Zevi is probably the most famous of these. Zevi came up with this weird program on this Kabbalistic thinking, which was going to invert it, that you no longer actually identify and release and recombine the divine sparks to the whole through a repair process of keeping the commandments, but rather by intentionally breaking them. And so this is like an inversion of Judaism, and as a style of mysticism. This was not popular. He is considered a splinter character, and he was actually chased out of Europe, and I think ended up, I'd have to double check this, I don't remember exactly for sure, but he may have ended up in Turkey. He converted to Islam and lived the last several years, last decade or so of his life as a Muslim. He had a guy that shot off of him. You've probably heard of this if you follow stuff from Candace freaking Owens, which is Jakob Frank. And so Frankism, as you may have heard it, the Frankists are a further sect that runs with this idea of inverted tikkun olam, or tikkun olam repair, by intentionally shattering the commandments, by intentionally breaking the rules. And the allegation is that this line of thought is communism, is where communism came from. And this isn't correct. It's not all the way incorrect. However, because there were some bad people looking into mystical things, trying to figure out how to do things, and a lot of communists are bad people who incorporated bad practices, and for whatever reasons. I mean, Marx had openly said that he took up with Satan. I don't know that he was schooled in these things at all. There's apparently not any good evidence that he was, but this is the kind of thing that definitely would have attracted him. But what we're going to find out in this episode is that none of that is necessary. None of it matters. Because what was going on was something different. The actual foundations of communism and revolutionary communism are elsewhere. The mysticism comes in largely because of Marx and the young Hegelians, through the dialectic, through Hegel being a Hermeticist. There's claims, for example, floating around that it was Moses Hess who helped transform Marx and Engels' thinking, and that Moses Hess was a Kabbalist. Well, later, it turns out. Later, not at the time, but he did actually emphasize to the younger Marx and Engels that the idea or idealist version that of praxis in the world or transformation in the world that Hegel put forth is not adequate, and that you actually have to do praxis, you have to do work in the world, which then maps onto this tikkun olam. It was almost 15 to 20 years later that Moses Hess ends up going and actually openly studying Kabbalah, but nonetheless, this gets transposed. And the question is, was Moses Hess looking at some of these strains? I don't know. The evidence seems thin of Kabbalist thinking in order to come up with the idea that praxis in the world is more important than ideas, thus changing Marx's thinking. Remember, this is the same Moses Hess who helped contribute to the Communist Confession of Faith, which was the first original draft of what became the Communist Manifesto later. So this is another one of these lines of accusation that, oh, it's Jewishness that seeped in, it's a Jewish practices, that's what defines communism. But what we're going to hear is it's just simply not what happened. It's just simply not the case. However, it is true that Jewish and Christian Kabbalah and lines of mysticism therein were mixed into what Hegel was doing, what many young Hegelians were thinking about, what other radicals in the milieu were thinking about, what other mystical traditions like Rosicrucians, the Bavarian Illuminati, and so on were incorporating into their beliefs. It's also true, however, that rank Gnosticism is blatantly visible and present. Rank Hermeticism is blatantly visible and present. So it's one stream of mishmash mysticism that did likely have some influence in developing the praxis and, if you want to use that phrasing, grammar that defines how communism works. I have a very kind of complicated and sophisticated theory about this, but the short version of what's going on without getting into any of the details is that these people had a political, economic, and social theory they wanted to achieve, and they did not give a shit what they incorporated in order to do it, in order to justify it. Okay, so it's very syncretistic. It's like the analogies I've used before is that it's like cooking a soup. Okay, so you put a bunch of vegetables in, you put some meat in, you put some water in, you put some like bay leaves or something in, and you cook it. Let's say you got carrots and celery and onions and garlic and rosemary and bay leaves and beef in your soup. And then I say, hey, can you taste the beef? And you're like, yeah, I taste that beefy flavor. And I say, can you taste the carrot? And you take a sip and you're like, yeah, the carrot really sticks out. Like, can you taste that, earthiness, that earthy rosemary thing? And you're like, yeah, the rosemary is really a nice component. And you can taste each one of those ingredients individually if I ask you about them, or if you look for them, or you think about them. But if I gave you imagine the soup is broth, not like a stew. It's just a broth and all these ingredients, and we've strained it out. And I give you the liquid and I say, get the carrot back out. You can't, because the carrot isn't in there anymore. It's not the essence of the carrot is in there. It's that the carrot gave up a lot of what it is into a homogeneous mixture that is no longer a carrot in any regard. There's no solid carrot. You cannot pull the carrot out. Even if the carrot pieces were still in there, you could pull pieces of carrot out. And if you've cooked it long enough, most of them don't even taste like carrot anymore. They just taste like this soup because their flavor, their compounds have gone out into it. So what we have is social, political, and economic theory that people desire to implement that has mystical strains, and that's like the soup. Can you find the Kabbalah in there? Yeah, if you try to taste for it. Can you find the Gnosticism? Yeah, it's really blatant, as a matter of fact. It's kind of like the main ingredient. Can you find the Hermeticism? Oh, absolutely. It's right here, and this is where it comes from. Yes, definitely. Can you pull them out and say, Marxism is this? The answer is no, you cannot. It is a mixture of those things that cannot be separated any longer. And it was not a deliberate rewriting. It was not like, we're going to figure out how to do Kabbalah in the secular realm, or we're going to figure out how to do Gnosticism in the social economic realm, or we're going to figure out how to do Hermeticism in the sociological realm. It wasn't that. It was all of these influences and ideas about how society allegedly works that were all being drawn upon, hodgepodge, and divorced from their original content on purpose in order to create a system that would implement and succeed in implementing the social, political, and economic goals that they had. That was a long confrontation of something complicated and ugly that we have to deal with because the propagandists are out in force. But we're going to hear now two documents. I'm going to introduce who Gracchus Babeuf was. Francois Noël, that is Gracchus being his codename Babeuf. I'm going to introduce this character, and I'm going to introduce a couple of his influences, and we're going to hear where communism came from without having to have any of that other stuff except as vague influences floating out in the world. It is true that Karl Marx was a young Hegelian. It is true that Karl Marx made this program deliberately transformative and dialectical. It is true that Karl Marx incorporated the idea of praxis, which very well may have had elements that were drawn from Kabbalistic mystical thinking, but you're going to hear that it wasn't just there. This is from very practical atheistic sources and Christian sources that predate Marx by a lot, deists as well. So the first communist is not Karl Marx. The first actual revolutionary communist is a guy named Francois Noël Babeuf, who went by Gracchus Babeuf, and I will refer to him as Gracchus Babeuf. And Gracchus Babeuf lived during the French Revolution. He was Jacobin sympathetic. He was a leftist. He never actually joined the Jacobins. He thought that the philosophies of Jean-Jacques Rousseau were largely right in certain respects, but that he tried to retain too many different elements of other things that he didn't agree with. So he wasn't a full-blown Rousseauian. He did like the idea of the general will. He liked the idea of the social contract and that having force of law. It's likely he believed some of the Gnostic inclinations that Rousseau undoubtedly exhibited. For example, Rousseau had is probably one of his most famous lines, if not his most famous line, is "Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains," thinking that the social structures that we live in, that we're born into, constrain us and prevent us from being truly free. It is almost certainly the case that he adopted the early dialectical thinking, the Hermetic thinking rooted in Rousseau also. Rousseau was fascinated with the idea of man's true state in nature, and that was a free state, but also a very social state where responsibility is distributed. This is where his ideas of the general will and the social contract come from. But he was fascinated with the noble savage and this idea that we limit ourselves by having the strictures and requirements of society, decency, laws, scientific, reasoning, appealing to evidence, and so on, that keeps us from being truly free in who we are and wish to be. So he fantasized about this concept that he called savages made to live in cities. So you're going to have this idea of the free, noble savage who's now been civilized, not by restricting himself through arbitrary social laws and customs that are like chains binding him, but rather that he's going to be refined to be able to live in a city while retaining all of his original freedom. And that's how the general will and social contract are supposed to work, coming from Rousseau. So Rousseau has these mystical views that are Gnostic and Hermetic. They are unmistakable. They're not able to be missed. They inspired the dialectic of Kant and the dialectic of Hegel explicitly. Schiller is one of the conduits. Also, I think Schelling was one of the conduits. These are also guys at this Tübingen Stift, which is this weird seminary that had all these mystical practices based off of Jakob Boehme, who precedes all of this by his early 1600s by almost 200 years. And this is what I'm talking about. There being this like mishmash, this miasma of influences that are being despiritualized through the Enlightenment. That's also a very important part of this story. That the Enlightenments, plural, are proceeding now and in competition with one another, in argument with one another. There's kind of a dual, slightly competitive English and Scottish Enlightenment. There's a French Enlightenment and there's a German Enlightenment, and they're not the same thing. So when people tell you, oh, well, the Enlightenment, no, there is no the Enlightenment. There are different Enlightenments. And at the very least, you have to separate it into the British Enlightenments and the European Enlightenments, and they're still not the same. Those are very different. And then even within the continent and within the British Isles, there are distinctions. America, by the way, is largely drawing off of not just kind of the mixture of these things, but very heavily off of the Scottish Enlightenment, while looking at what the French Enlightenment is producing and rejecting a lot of it. Like, oh my God, we can't do what the French are doing. Although there were points. Montesquieu and so on had some points. Voltaire had some points that they liked. And so you can't deny that it had some influence, but they very much hedged toward the Scottish Enlightenment, which is all of these Enlightenments are like oh my God, we can understand reality like as it is in front of us, and we are creatures of reason, and we can make sense of the world around us. And you have this period of time for literally a couple hundred years sprawling. It's not like, you wake up one day and the Enlightenment happened and everybody's different. You have this sprawling thing happening across a continent in different ways, in different places, with different people at different times, not agreeing with one another, fighting with one another. And they're all trying to grapple with this idea that maybe the old myths aren't quite the whole story, and maybe we are, as creatures of reason, can figure out a lot more about our world than we've been doing so far. And maybe the Catholic Church in particular at that point has been holding us down from knowing truths about the world that are really important. And maybe we need to probe the limits of that. The Germans in particular were very interested in that. You have this very mystical character, a Frenchman, René Descartes, who is blamed rightly for a lot of what went wrong in this way of thinking. But when you look at people like Kant and Hegel, they're coming up with what are called systematic philosophies. They're trying to come up with a philosophical theory of everything, because now all of a sudden we're creatures of reason. But then you have Kant doing a critique of pure reason, trying to find the limits where reason isn't adequate. All right, so I know it's not what we normally do here, but I'm going to do a little ad read. It's not an ad for somebody else, it's an ad for me. New Discourses is hosting a Preserving Liberty Conference at Sea this November 15th through 22nd, 2026. We'll be sailing round trip through the Caribbean out of Tampa, Florida. You can register now by going to ndcruise.com. That's ndcruise.com. And when you do, you are signing up to go for an entire week on a sweet Caribbean vacation in the middle of November with all of the cool people who love and support New Discourses the most. These are great people. They come to conferences. I've met almost everybody. It's going to be a blast. You don't want to miss it. So I will see you at the Preserving Liberty Conference at Sea, November 15th through 22nd, sailing from Tampa, Florida. And you can sign up at ndcruise.com. And so this is a very interesting time. And there's a lot of not having your feet firmly on the ground, a lot of having your head in the clouds. A lot of people like to think, oh, well, it was the Catholic Church and the religious tradition, and that's that. And then there was the Enlightenment and secularism came. This isn't right. There was so much freaking weird mysticism. There were cults. There were secret societies. The Catholics themselves didn't have this single voice. The Protestant Reformation has happened by the early 1500s and is unfolding through Europe and beyond. You've got a lot of different ideas and a lot of different things happening all at once. And again, this is sprawling over a couple of centuries, arguably 3 centuries, that this is sprawling across with different people in different times thinking. It wasn't like, secularism just descended and it upset the Catholic Church. That's like the second grader's story. And the Catholics, by the way, were not a single voice. You had Jesuits, you had Benedictines, you had other orders within the Catholic Church. You had the Vatican that was trying to coordinate all of it. You had the very different lines of thinking going on for very different purposes, even within that. And different people at different times were fighting against different things in different ways for different reasons. The French Revolution has lots of pieces that have to do with Catholicism and both, seeing it as the divine embodiment of kings, as a necessary piece of being French, all kinds of things, but at the same time is also being, if you look at the side on the left, the Jacobins as being the arch enemy, as being fundamentally the problem. You have some people who are atheists, some people who are deists, some people who are anarchists, some people who are literally totalitarians on the left. You have other people who are literally totalitarians on the right. You have a real complicated story going on. It's not just this really simple thing. Okay, so the point is, I bring all that up to say this is all unfolding in this context, and this context is loaded with beliefs. Some of them are religious, some of them are heretical religious, some of them are outright mystical. And you have people that are now trying to make sense of the world. I know I still haven't gotten to these documents, or even really told you about Gracchus Babeuf. So Gracchus Babeuf is a product of this. And he's absorbed a lot of this. He's absorbed some of Rousseau's Gnosticism, some of Rousseau's Hermeticism, for certain. It's not in question. He did. He also had other points of inspiration. He was a radical. He was a revolutionary. He's the first revolutionary communist, which means he was a revolutionary, which means he was extraordinarily radical. He set up the commune that was called the Conspiracy of the Equals, that Karl Marx later praised and criticized, I should say, in the economic philosophic manuscripts in 1844, which he wrote in Paris after learning a lot about this while in Paris for the previous year, and with his correspondences in what was called the Communist Correspondence Committee or Communist Correspondence League, I think, and then also with his work with the League of the Just, which became the Communist League in 1847, right before they published the manifesto. He learned about all of this stuff and called it crude communism. So when I've characterized for you guys the difference between crude communism and transcendent communism, Babeuf is the crude communist guy. He was the first communist. So he's got a revolutionary streak, and he never joined the Jacobins because he was to the left of the Jacobins. He was more insane than the Jacobins, but he thought that Maximilien Robespierre and some of the other Jacobins had the right idea. I don't even know how to say the word that enrages or enrage. It looks like enrage, which was I don't speak French, so I don't know how to say that word, was a faction, a very radical faction within the French Revolution, more radical than the Jacobins. And Babeuf did not align perfectly with them, but drew heavy inspiration off this far left, heavily radical, violent revolutionary line of thought during the French Revolution. He eventually, by the way, gets put to death by the Jacobins for his conspiracy of equals, or of the equals, sorry. The conspiracy of the equals was the first attempt to install communism anywhere in the world in a meaningful sense outside of a religious commune. Religious communes predated the whole thing. We don't have to get into the long history of that, but this was the first secular attempt and the first revolutionary attempt, which again Marx praised, Marx drew inspiration from, and so on. Well, one of Gracchus Babeuf's most powerful influences is this fellow Morelli. Let me see if I can find his proper first name. It's a very French name. Morelli in 1755 wrote The Code of Nature, or sometimes called The True Spirit of the Laws. So this Morelli character is extraordinarily important in Babeuf's thinking. Let me see if I can get Morelli's first name. I thought it was on this document. I don't even know how to say it. Etienne Gabriel Morelli, a French utopian thinker, philosopher, and novelist who actually, not only was he a utopian thinker, you're going to really get this vibe from him as we go through, he was a tax official in France. He lived 1717 to 1778, and he wrote the thing that we're talking about in 1755, which is called the Code of Nature, which is 1755 is 90 years before the Communist Manifesto, 93 years actually before the Communist Manifesto. This guy, Morelli, was a vicious critic of Montesquieu, who is one of the theorists who had everything to do with how the Americans drew from the French in setting up what they did in terms of a liberal system. This guy is not a liberal. He is a utopian socialist. So Marx would have looked to this kind of stuff as inspiration, but he also would have criticized it as one of the utopian socialists who he takes to task in those economic philosophic manuscripts. But Babeuf drew heavily from Morelli in the Code of Nature and the true, or what was also called the True Spirit of Laws. So it turns out on Marxists.org, one of our favorite websites, we actually have a excerpt from it. It's not the entire Code of Nature. Notice that it's called the Code of Nature. It's supposed to be literally natural law according to a utopian socialist. And so I'm going to read this excerpt. It's not super complete, but there's enough here. And what you're going to hear is that, holy crap, this is communism. These are the exact ideas, such as from each according to his ability and to each according to his needs, that Marx later codified. Okay, and what religion was this guy? It's not known. He was a tax collector in France. There is no history, no known Jewish origins or ancestry in the guy whatsoever. Chances are is that he was either a Catholic or a lapsed Catholic or a deist. It's possible he was an atheist, but it's very likely that he was either a Catholic, a lapsed Catholic, or a deist. It is possible, however, that he was Calvinist or something of that kind, though they were extremely minority in France. So here's how this excerpt that we have begins. The only vice, and this is in Morelli's voice, the only vice that I perceive in the universe is avarice. All the others, whatever name they be known, are only variations degrees of this one. It is the Proteus, the Mercury, the basis, the vehicle of all the vices. So avarice, greed, he says, is the only true vice. It's the only vice in the universe. Everything else is derivative to that. Not envy, not pride, everything. It's all greed. Analyze vanity, fatuousness, pride, ambition, duplicity, hypocrisy, dishonesty. Break down most of our sophistic virtues into their component parts, and they all resolve themselves into this subtle and pernicious element, the desire to have. You even find it at the bottom of disinterestedness, he says. Now, would this universal plague, this slow fever, private interest? So now avarice boils down to private interest, the desire to have. Would this universal plague, this slow fever, private interest, ever have been able to take hold if it had found no sustenance, nor even the slightest dangerous ferment? I believe, he says, that no one will contest the justness of this proposition, that where no property exists, none of its pernicious consequences could exist. That is his most famous sentence, according to Wikipedia. The true medium, it says, of all political or moral demonstration and the primary cause of all disorder is the title of the next little section. He says, I dare to conclude here, and there is ellipsis, so something has been skipped. This is a narrow excerpt, like I said. I dare to conclude here that it is almost mathematically demonstrable that all division of goods, whether equal or unequal, and that all private property from among these portions it is all societies what Horace calls material for the highest evil. End quote. All moral and political phenomena are the effects of this pernicious cause, he tells us. Though it can be explained and resolved, all theorems or problems about the origin or advancement of the connection or affinity between the different virtues and vices, disorders and crimes, about the true motives behind good or bad actions, about all resolutions or perplexities of the human will, about the depravity of the passions, about the ineffectuality of precepts and laws that are meant to contain them, about the very technical faults in these lessons, finally about all the monstrous productions that come from the aberrations of the mind or the heart. I say that the grounds for all of these defects can be seen in the general tendency of legislators to allow the primary link to all sociability to be broken by the usurpation of the resources that should belong in common to all humanity. You couldn't get more communist than that, ladies and gentlemen. So then it says, that which should remove from man any idea of moral evil. It is therefore certain, Morelli tells us, that this moral principle, quote, do good in order to receive good, end quote, precedence among men over the other maxim, quote, do not do to others what you would find distasteful if done to you, end quote. Now, if you were to take away property, he says, the blind and pitiless self-interest that accompanies it, you would cause all the prejudices and errors that they sustain to collapse. There would be no more resistance, either offensive or defensive, among men. There would be no more furious passions, ferocious actions, notions or ideas of moral evil. If any were to remain, or if some vestige of it were to re-emerge, this would only be the result of the merest accident, one of the smallest consequence. Minor oppositions of will and obfuscating ever so slightly the light of reason among the opponents would, far from weakening the domination of natural beneficence, only cause men to have a greater sense of its importance. In a word, there would be only a few small discords in society. It would quickly recover its harmony and proceed to do far less to trouble this harmony than it would do to prevent it from fading away. So if we get rid of property itself, if we were to take away property, that's how it begins. If you were to take away property and you were to live according to do good in order to receive good, then all moral evil would go away. All of it. There would be no more furious passions, ferocious actions, notions, or ideas of moral evil, he says, if we got rid of property. And if any did remain, he says, if any of it were to reemerge, some vestige of it were to reemerge, he says, it would only be a small consequence, smallest possible thing. It's just an accident. And it's a tiny. All you're going to have, he says, is minor oppositions of will, because everybody's going to get along because of, what does he say? The domination of natural beneficence. He actually believes, it's very important to understand the starting point of this line of thought. He believes that men are naturally beneficent, but they've been thrust into conflict and war and moral evil itself by this idea of private property. So if you didn't have this idea of this is mine and that is yours and that shall not be alienated without our permission and mutual, you would have the natural beneficence of man would take over. And he says, actually, even where problems come up, far from weakening the domination of natural beneficence, he says, it would only cause men to have a greater sense of its importance. Like you'd say, oh my God, what are we doing? We're fighting. Everything should be so harmonious and we're fighting. What are we doing? Let's get rid of these nasty ideas of yours and mine and get back to the ground state of natural beneficence of man. And he concludes this by saying, in a word, if you were to take away property, that's the beginning of the paragraph, in a word, there would be only a few small discords in society. It would quickly recover its harmony and proceed to do far less trouble, far less to trouble this harmony than it would do to prevent it from fading away. So this guy doesn't like private property. Everything should be held in common. It says that explicitly, right? The resources that should belong in common to all humanity. And those have been usurped by this idea of private property and protected by states rather than having states exercise their power to stop it. So again, this is 1755. This is 93 years before the Communist Manifesto was written. Doesn't it sound like the Communist Manifesto? It does, in fact, except for the part about the specifics of the class warfare and the fact that the communists will be the vanguard. It's the same exact logic. Why? Because it's the same exact ideas. And are you hearing any weird mysticism? No, you're hearing a complete failure to understand man's nature. That's all you actually need here. Oh, we're reasonable, beneficent people, so we'll totally get along if we just share everything in common. There's no obvious strains, at least not yet, of any Gnosticism or Hermeticism or mysticism or Kabbalah or anything in this text. And this text is the origin point for communism. This is the text that inspired Gracchus Babeuf. This is the model that he wanted to employ in his revolutionary communist system. This was the goal. And this text blatantly inspired Marx almost a century later to write down his communism. There's no Jewishness here, guys. There's no even mysticism here. Model legislation, the next section. It's broken into lots of little sections. Model legislation that conforms to the intentions of nature. So now it's going to talk about the laws because he understands the intentions of nature. Now notice that we're not talking about the intentions of God here. We're talking about the intentions of nature. He understands what nature intends because he has a shitty theory of human nature and nature overall. He says, I am giving a sketch of laws as a sort of appendix outside of the body of the work itself, since it is unfortunately all too true that to form a republic of this sort would be just about impossible at the present time. So there's some force to society stopping them from being able to form a republic. You notice how like all of the communist states are called people's republics? right? All of them are republics, right? What was the R in USSR? Republic. What is the R in the PRC, People's Republic of China? What is the R in the Democratic Republic of Korea? Democratic People's Republic of Korea, I'm sorry. DPRK. Republic. They believe they're forming a communist republic. And he says, well, it would be impossible to do it, but let's sketch what kind of laws you would have to have. And I want you to hear how stupid this is. Like, I want you to hear how just not real this is. And also that this guy was definitely a tax official is going to shine through. He says, any sensitive reader will be able to judge from the text, which requires no long commentaries, how many miseries mankind would be spared by the exercise of these laws. So it's like, how do we make it work? Oh, it'd be great if it did work. And there's so many miseries that we suffer that we're not doing this, that it's justified to do it. The standard kind of, what I've called dialectical inversion later. I have just proven, he says, that it would have been easy for the first legislators. That's not in this excerpt, by the way. This is a very short excerpt. I remind you, this is the excerpt the Marxists provide. This is what they think is useful to themselves on this source. I have just proven, he says, that would have been easy for the first legislators to see to it that the peoples of the world were spared knowledge of any laws. If my proofs are complete, then I have achieved my objective. I do not have the temerity to pretend to reform mankind. So let's just forget about the whole Kabbalah Tikkun Olam thing here. But I claim at least courage enough to be able to speak the truth untroubled by the outcries of those who bring truth into the question, because their concern, who bring truth into question because their concern is to deceive mankind, or at least to let it remain entangled in errors by which they themselves have been duped. So sacred and fundamental laws that would tear out the roots of vice and all the evils of a society. That's the next section. Sacred and fundamental laws that would tear out the roots of vice and all of the evils of a society. So think about what the communists, even the woke ones today, are talking about. They're always talking about getting to the root causes of problems. They're going to get down to the bottom. They're going to legislate to tear out the roots of vice. They're going to end crime by getting to what they call the root causes of crime, which amounts to that criminals are suffering various forms of oppression, etc. And of course they're wrong. This is all utopian nonsense thinking. Even Marx had the sense to say this is utopian nonsense thinking. But this is what this guy believed he was doing, and this is where communism develops, is from this idea of sacred and fundamental laws that would tear out the roots of vice and all evils of society. So the goal of this is actually a Puritan urge to rip all of the evils out of society. Now, just to be very clear, Jews don't think this. Jews don't believe that evil can be ripped out of society, as a matter of fact. This is not Jewish thinking at all. This is Puritan thinking. Jews actually believe that evil is a necessary result of the free will that God has given us, and it's just part of the world as a result of our fallenness in sin. There is absolutely no way to get rid of it. You cannot tear out the roots of vice and of all the evils of a society by any Jewish thinking whatsoever. So this isn't Jewish thinking. This is the roots of communism, is this belief that we can find laws, we can organize society, force society into an organizational structure that will pull up all vice. We'll pull out vice by the roots. There will be nothing bad, and everybody will be good to each other, and everything will be great, and everything will work. This is the same kind of utopian thinking, by the way, that possesses basically every utopian eventually. And by the way, Gracchus Babeuf, speaking of utopia, was in fact inspired by Thomas More in his satire, his political critical satire, Utopia, where he imagines a utopian island, utopia meaning nowhere, where there's freedom of religion and great religious tolerance and all these other things, and everything's supposed to be perfect. But Babeuf took it literally and thought, oh, well, that'd be a great world to live in. Okay, so sacred and fundamental laws that would tear out the roots of vice and all the evils of society. That's the real vision that communists believe that they're playing with, that they can create the correct legislation that forces people to live in a way that tears out the roots of vice and evil, and then everybody's going to be good because that's what we fundamentally are. which is also, I don't know how much Morelli trafficked with Rousseau, but it is a very Rousseauian view that man is a noble savage is noble. He's fundamentally good, but it is the nastiness of society that has made him wretched. So just to be clear, the rest of this document, which is most of it, is lots of these laws, and they are not all present. The communists, when they summarized this, did not put all of them. So there are 3 given here, and in some places the numbers are not sequential. Sometimes it jumps. So just giving you kind of fair warning. So what are these laws? 1, nothing in society will belong to anyone, either as a personal possession or as capital goods, except the things for which the person has immediate use for either his needs, his pleasures, or his daily work. This exact idea is incorporated directly in the 2nd chapter of the Communist Manifesto, where Karl Marx explains that bourgeois private property will be abolished, but individual property will be maintained. Marx actually tries to draw this line a lot. What's individual property is those things for which the person has immediate use, either for his needs, his pleasures, or his daily work. But there will be no private property. You can't own a thing, you can merely use it. And if it's got a property of consumptiveness to it, like a banana, you can eat your banana and then you can't give it back. You can't put it back in the community. So it's privatized in that sense, but it's not actually private. And the access to the banana will not be private. It will not be withheld from anybody. 2, every citizen will be a public man, sustained by, supported by, and occupied at the public expense. So everything will be within the state. 3, every citizen will make his particular contribution to the activities of the community according to his capacity, his talent, and his age. It is on this basis that his duties will be determined in conformity with the distributive laws. There it is, from each according to his abilities, which is in the core ideas of Marxism. I think that actually appears in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, not in the Communist Manifesto. From each according to, no, it's later. It's in, crap, it'll come to me. I can't think of what it's in, but it is definitely one of the core ideas of Karl Marx. So anyway, there's from each according to his abilities, and it is on this basis that his duties will be determined in conformity with the distributive laws. So now he has these distributive or economic laws. So by the way, did you just hear woke? Yes. Did you just hear communism? Yes. Did you just hear every high school and college age dipshit leftist? Yes, you did. This is where it came from. 1755, 93 years before the Communist Manifesto. Long before Karl Marx was even born, by the way. This being the vision text for Babeuf, who becomes the inspiration object for the secret societies and correspondence clubs that teach Marx communism later. Okay, distributive or economic laws. 1. In order that everything be carried out in good order, without confusion or trouble, every nation will be enumerated and divided into families, tribes, and cities, and if the number of cities is large enough, into provinces as well. 2. Each tribe will be made up of equal number of families, each city of an equal number of tribes, and so on. So everything's going to be very regular, and the state is going to make sure. So you're going to break all of society down into families, and then you're going to get a certain number of families, where PS is going to be based on the metric system, that are going to become tribes, and then they're going to have a certain number of tribes. PS is based on the metric system that define a city, and if you have too many cities, then you're going to separate into provinces, and that's how you're going to define the nation. As the nation grows, this is number 3, the tribes and cities will be expanded proportionately, but only until the point is reached where it will be possible to form out of the additional population a new city or cities as populous as the original ones. So we're going to control the population of any one of these things, and when they grow to a certain size, when you can split off and have a new equal-sized one, you have some mitosis. So you have cell mitosis of all of these units in society at the different levels. 4, the number 10 and its multiples will be the terms of all public division of things and persons. In other words, in all enumerations of things, all classifications, weights, measures, etc. will be made up of decimal parts. There's your metric system, 1755, right there. 5, for each occupation there will be, and by the way, the French Revolution, This was written in 1755. The French Revolution, which is in 1791, the Jacobins tried to install a system where everything would be based on 10. There was going to be 10-day-long weeks. There were going to be 10 months in a year. There's going to be 10 hours in a day. There's going to be 10 everything. 10, 10, 10. So all metric system. But right here, it's one of the distributive laws of this this communist system that's being devised by this, I should say, utopian socialist system that's being devised by this Morelli. 5, for each occupation, there will be so many tens and so many hundreds of workers in proportion to the difficulty of the work and in proportion to what is necessary to provide for the needs of a given city without overtiring the workers. 6, in order to regulate the distribution of the products of nature and art, it should first of all be noted that some products are durable, which is to say that they can be preserved or that they remain usable for a long time. Among the products of this sort are 1, those that are in daily and general use, 2, those that are in general use not all the time, 3, those that are constantly in use by at least one or a few persons at a time and are used by everybody in the long run, 4, those that are never of either general or constant use. These latter are made by specific agreements for individual tastes. Now, all these durable products will be gathered together in public stores in order to be distributed to all the citizens daily or at some other specified interval in the case of the first 3 categories of products, or on request in the case of the 4th category. You might have noticed that this guy is a tax official, and he is creating a tax official's utopia where everything will be very centrally organized, very centrally planned, very orderly, very neat. Everything will be based on tens, blah, blah, blah. 7, it should also be noted that there is an order of products of nature and art that are perishable. These things will be brought to the public places and distributed there by those assigned in advance to the production and preparations of goods of the sort. This is the canteens that you read about in Mao's China, by the way. 8, the quantities of the products of every variety will be determined and will then be apportioned either according to the number of citizens of each city or according to the number of those who use the particular product. The durable products will be publicly distributed according to the same rules, and the surplus will be placed in reserve. This is exactly how the Maoist canteens and central depots all worked. This is the system. 9, in the case of the provisions that are made only on request, whether they be of general or particular use, if the supply begins to run out before all orders have been filled, even if it is apparent that only one citizen will be deprived of his share, then all distributions of the product will be suspended, or else it will be apportioned in greatly reduced quantities until the lack has been corrected. But particular care must be taken to prevent mishaps of this sort in the case of goods in general use. So if you have some goods and there's not enough for everybody, nobody gets any, or they'll be massively rationed. This is what Mao did, man. It's like you read, I have these books, the People's Trilogy by Frank Decatur sitting right next to me on my desk. This is what they did. You read those books. This is what they did. This is communism, guys. 1755. And P.S. not a trace of Jewishness anywhere in this. 10. The surplus provisions of each city or province will be distributed among those in which there is a danger of a shortage or will be held in reserve for future cases of need. 11. In accordance with the sacred laws, nothing will be sold or exchanged between citizens. Someone who needs, for example, greens, vegetables, or fruits will go to the public square, which is where these items will have been brought by the man who cultivates them, and take what he needs for one day only. If someone needs bread, he will go to the baker and get the quantity that he needs for some specified period, and the baker will go to the public store to get the amount of grain that he needs for the quantity of bread that he has to prepare, whether for one day or several. Now, just try to imagine that in practice, right? So you're going to go to the baker, you're going to tell him how much bread you need. He's going to say, okay, I know how much bread you need. So he's going to go to the store to get the grain based on how much bread he has to make. Now, this is for one day only. So this is for today. So you're going to go and tell him, I need this much bread today because my kids are hungry or whatever, and we need this much. And he's going to say, oh, okay, that's great. And then he's going to take everybody's orders all day, everybody's orders, and then he's going to go to somehow after this, he's going to go get all the grain, and he's going to say, this is how much grain I need. But all the other bakers and such are going to do the same thing. And then the storehouse is going to provide the grain. They're going to go make the bread, and everybody's going to get their bread probably at like 11 p.m. Like, this is really stupid. Like, this is what I was talking about being a tax official coming up with a really stupid system. Whoever needs an article of clothing, he says, will get it from the man who makes such articles, while the clothing maker will get his fabrics from the man who manufactures them, and the manufacturer of fabrics will in turn get his raw materials from the public store, where it will have been brought by those who cut or gather it, and so on, for all the things that are to be distributed to heads of families for their use and that of their children. 12. If the nation helps a neighboring or foreign nation by sending some of its goods, or is helped in this way by some other nation, this commerce alone will be the method of exchange and will be carried out through the intermediary of citizens whose transactions will be public, but scrupulous care must be taken to see to it that such commerce does not introduce private property of any sort into the republic. You can just try to imagine how that's going to work. So if you're going to trade between nations, okay, that's trade. That's fine. That's trade. But the people involved in doing it don't get to keep anything extra for themselves. There can be no private property introduced. So no corruption allowed. But everybody has this like weird deprivation, highly managed situation that they have to live in. Like, none of this is going to work, right? Like, any idiot can look at this and see that none of this is going to work. It's really kind of unbelievable. But this is communism. Agrarian laws. 1. Every city will have a stretch of cultivable land that will be as contiguous and uniform as possible, that will not be held either as a whole or in part as private property by anyone, and that will be sufficient for the subsistence of the inhabitants. So every city will have a farm that is as much as possible a single plot that everybody works on and everybody takes from, that will also be big enough to feed everybody there. I mean, that's great, right? In theory, that's great in imagination, but then there's reality, right? So this is all stupid. 2, if a city is situated in an arid region, then only crafts will be practiced there in the neighboring cities. So if it's too dry to farm, well, you won't have a farm. But every city is supposed to have a farm, but you won't have a farm. So you'll only do crafts, and the neighboring cities will provide what is necessary for the subsistence of its inhabitants. But this city will nevertheless have, like every other community, its core of agricultural workers who will work either in the city's own territory, wherever there are arable places, or in the agricultural areas of the neighboring cities. So if you live in a place where you can't farm, you have farmers who will do what they can, but the other ones will go to other places and farm for them, and then you'll get the neighboring cities are going to take care of you because they're legally required to. 3, every citizen between the ages of 20 and 25, without exception, will be required to do agricultural work unless some infirmity renders him unable to do so. They did that in Mao's China. In fact, every person had to be a farmer, a factory worker, in the army, and maybe something else. But certainly those 3. And you had to do all of it. And in fact, everything was going to be run kind of like it was the army. It was going to have you had an agricultural army that was going to grow. And everybody had to be a farmer. Everybody had to be a soldier. And everybody had to be a factory worker. And this actually caused a disaster in China, because what you had is nobody ever got good at anything. And you basically had to rotate and had incompetence doing everything all the time, everywhere. So edile laws. 1, since the number of families in a tribe will not exceed a certain amount, or at least will exceed it by very little, and the number of tribes in a city will never exceed a certain amount by a margin of more than 1, the areas of every city will be very nearly the same. Everything's got to be equal, guys. 2, the public stores for all supplies and the public assembly rooms will be erected in the form of a uniform and pleasant structure around a great even-sided town square. I mean, I live in the mountains, like in a sort of, not really, I live in a hilly region near the mountains. You just can't fucking do this everywhere, man. 3, outside this quadrangle will be the neighborhoods of the city, distributed at regular intervals, equal in size, of the same shape, and uniformly divided up into streets. 4, each tribe will occupy a neighborhood, and each family will have spacious and comfortable lodgings within it. All these buildings will be uniform. Just think about this. It's just communism. I don't even know what else to say about it. But it's so unbelievably centrally planned down to like the dumbest details. 5, all the neighborhoods of the city will be laid out in such a way that they can be expanded whenever necessary without disturbing the regularity of the arrangement, and these expansions will not exceed certain limits. Of course, they won't exceed certain limits part's probably the most important. But again, it depends on where you live if this is even possible. You cannot lay out the city such that it is perfectly uniform and that it can be expanded in a perfectly uniform, replicated way. How boring is this, by the way, where every neighborhood is literally the same? But you can't even do that in most places. Like, actual physical geography gets in your way. But this is utopian socialism. They don't care about that. 6, some distance away around the various neighborhoods of the city, arcades will be built housing the workshops of every mechanical profession in which the core of workers exceeds 10 in number. 7, beyond this belt of workshops will be erected another circle of buildings to house persons who are employed in agriculture and related occupations. These buildings will also serve as workshops for these occupations, or as barns, storerooms, stables, or tool sheds, in whatever number these things are required by the particular city. 8, beyond all these ranges of buildings, some distance away in the most felicitous possible location, will be erected a spacious and comfortable building in which every citizen who is ill will be lodged and cared for. 9, there's your universal health care, by the way. 9, not far away, a comfortable retreat for all aged and infirm citizens will be erected. 10, somewhere else in the most unpleasant and barren location that can be found will be erected a building surrounded by high walls divided into small cells and enclosed in iron bars, in which all those who deserve to be separated from society for a time may be incarcerated. So there'll be a jail for everybody who's not participating, and it'll be in the worst place they can find and surrounded by iron bars. Police laws. 1, in every occupation, the oldest and most experienced will take turns every 5 days, according to seniority, in supervising 5 or 10 of their companions, and will demand no more or no less work of them than they would demand of themselves. Isn't this fantastic? The tax collector part just screams. So maybe we stop blaming Jews for communism. We start blaming tax officials for communism because, geez. 2, in every occupational group, there will be one master for every 10 or 20 workers, and it will be his task to instruct them, inspect their work, and report on their work and conduct to the chief of the corps. Will be chosen annually. Every master will hold his position for life and will take his turn at being chief of the corps. I know that the grammar is not good. This is a translation from the French. I don't know what's going on. 3, no one will be master in occupation sooner than 1 year after he has completed his agricultural service and returned to his original occupation. That is, not before he is 26 years of age. No. 4. 5, at the age of 10, every citizen will begin learning the occupation to which he is inclined and of which he seems capable without excessively straining itself. At the aged 15 or 18, he will be married. Between the ages of 20 and 25, he will perform one of the agricultural occupations. At 26, he will become a master either in his original occupation, if he returns to it, or in an agricultural occupation, if he chooses to remain in one. But if he decides to take up an entirely different line of work, he cannot become a master until the age of 30. At the age of 40, every citizen who has not by then become a master in some trade will be a freelance worker, which is to say that without being exempt from doing work altogether, he will nevertheless not be forced to do any work other than what he chooses, or any task other than what he imposes upon himself. He will be the master of his own free hours. That's the most fantastical thing in this entire document, honestly. 7, again, it skips around. There's no 6 here. The chiefs of each occupation will indicate the hours of rest and work and will designate which jobs have to be performed. 8, every 5th day will be a public day of rest. Every 5th day will be a public day of rest. For this reason, the year will be divided into 73 equal parts. Every leap year, one of the days of rest will be doubled. 9. Public festivals will always begin on a day of rest and will last 6 days, counting the day on which they begin. 10. The festivals will be celebrated immediately after the first plowing, before the beginning of the harvest, after the picking of the various fruits, and at the beginning of each year. During this last festival, all marriages will be performed, and the annually appointed chiefs of cities and occupational groups will take up their posts. Very centrally planned, right? And these are the laws that are going to get rid of all the evils and vices of men. Sumptuary laws. 1. At the age of 30, every citizen will be allowed to address according to his taste, but not in any excessively fancy way. So by address, I think it means dress. At the age of 30, but not before, I guess, every citizen can dress up however he wants according to his taste, but not in any excessively fancy way. He will take his nourishment within his family circle as before, without intemperance or gluttony. The senators and chiefs are authorized by this law to punish all excess in this matter, and they are themselves to give an example of moderation to others. 2. The young people between ages of 20 and 30 will be dressed uniformly within each occupation in apparel that is both clean and appropriate to the particular work. Each corps will be distinguished by some color appropriate to the principal object of its work, or by some other distinguishing mark. 3. Every citizen will have both a work suit and a holiday suit, each of them modestly and appropriately adorned. The attire will be no more splendid than what the Republic can afford, and no ornament will be permitted that might make a person stand out from the others in preference or regard. All manifestations of vanity will be suppressed by the chiefs and fathers of families. Doesn't this sound like a fun community to live in? Because it's going to get rid of all vice. But does it sound more Jewish or Puritan to you? Just pose that question. Laws pertaining to the form of government that would prevent all tyrannical domination. Right. This whole thing is tyrannical domination. But anyway, laws pertaining to the form of government that would prevent all tyrannical domination. 1. Every head of family will become a senator at the age 50, and will have a deliberate and indecisive. This is the grammar here; it's not so good. And will have a deliberate and decisive voice in every regulation that must be made pursuant to the intentions of the laws that the Senate is to preserve. 2. The other chiefs of families or professional corps will be consulted in the regulation of matters concerning their occupations. 3. Every family in a tribe will take its turn in providing a chief for the tribe who will hold that position for the rest of his life. 4. The tribal chiefs will take turns at being chief of the city for terms of 1 year. Chief of the city is roughly the mayor. 5. Each city will have its turn providing a chief for the province, which will be an annual appointment made by turns from chiefs of each of the tribes of the city. 6. Each province will have its turn in providing a chief for the entire state who will be in that position for life. I don't know if this is kind of the model by which the Soviets were created, but it doesn't sound very workable in reality. But that's supposed to prevent tyranny. Laws of administration and government. 1. The function of the Supreme Senate will be to examine the decisions and directives of the Senate of each city, and to see to it that they contain nothing that would contradict the laws of the state, either in the present or the future, and at the measures taken for police purposes or for the economy are wise and in conformity with the intentions of the laws. In consequence of this examination, the Supreme Senate will confirm or reject these particular directives in whole or in part. Whatever has been less fixed as law for a single city will then be observed in all the others, and will be given the force of law by the acquiescence of the local senates. 2 and 3 are not present. 4. The annually appointed chiefs of cities and provinces will occupy themselves only with their express functions. After the expiration of their terms, they will then be free to practice whatever profession they wish. 5. Every senator, political chief, workshop overseer, and master artisan will be respected and obeyed in matters pertaining to the common service of the country, just as fathers of family are respected by their children. So they're going to be commanded respect. If you're in an official job, sounds like a good formula there. 6, the formula of every public directive will be reason wills it and the law commands it. I just want to remind you that this is supposed to be non-tyrannical. Reason wills it and the law commands it. Conjugal laws that would do away with debauchery. Okay, so we don't want debauchery. That would be bad. 1, every citizen will be married as soon as he has reached the marriageable age. No one will be exempt from this, at least as long as nature or health presents no obstacle. So when you get to the marrying age, you have to get married. Period. 2, the marriage ceremonies will be held publicly at the beginning of each year. The young people of both sexes will be brought together in the presence of the city senate. Every boy would choose the girl that pleases him, and after obtaining her consent will take her as his wife. I'm sure that is going to be a perfectly reasonable and sensible and fantastic day. They're all going to come together in front of the Senate, and the boys are going to try to pick the girls, and the girls are going to say yes or no, and they're all just going to sort out, and everybody has to get married by law, so they better figure it out. 3, the first marriage will be indissoluble for a period of 10 years, after which divorce will be permitted, either at the consent of both partners in the marriage or of one only. Educational laws that would prevent the consequences of the blind indulgence of children by their parents. So you don't want blind indulgence of children by their parents, so we have to have educational laws to make sure that's not the case. 1, and this one skips around a lot. Mothers will, I think there are probably a lot of these. Mothers will nurse their own children if their health permits and will not be exempted from it without unquestionable proof of their own indisposition. So you'll be required to breastfeed your children. 4, so I don't know what 2 and 3 are. I'm sure they're juicy. These are the ones the communists think were important, remember. Within each tribe, all children reaching the age of 5 will be brought together, and the two sexes will be separately housed and fed in hand establishment set aside for this purpose. I'm not exactly sure what that's translating. Their food, clothing, and elementary education will be uniform throughout the land without any distinctions in accordance with the rules that be set down by the Senate. 5, for periods of 5 days at a time, groups of parents will succeed one another in taking care of the children in these establishments with as much care as they would give to their own under the supervision of the tribal chief. They will apply themselves to inspiring moderation and obedience in their charges and will try to prevent, through the use of either gentle persuasion or mild punishment, all discords, caprices, or bad habits. They will treat all the children with absolute equality. If they don't, of course, they're going to the prison place, right? So for periods of 5 days, nobody raises their own kids. All the kids are put together in a sex-segregated boarding house at the age of 5 years old. Up to that point, mother has to breastfeed the children. Then they go off to this. Okay, and so then they get into these boarding situations. All the children don't live at home anymore above the age of 5. And the adults will take, groups of parents will take turns being the basically den mothers of the entire gaggle of children. That's the strategy. That's how it's going to work. 6, as their reason begins to develop, the children will be instructed in the laws of the country. They will be taught to respect the laws, to obey their parents, the chiefs, and the other mature persons. They will be shown how to get along with their equals, to cultivate friendship with them, and never to lie. They will be instructed in activities suitable to their age, and from time to time in games that will help them mold their bodies and prepare them for mature work. Nothing will be prescribed for them until they have first been made to see its reasonableness. So the children have to be convinced that what's going to happen with them is reasonable. This whole child-centered bullcrap. 1755, guys. Communist thinking from 1755. Nothing will be prescribed to the children until they have first been made to see its reasonableness. These first instructions from the age of whenever their reason begins to develop, whatever that means. These first instructions will continue to be cultivated by the masters, into whose care the children will be entrusted upon their leaving the first phase of childhood. What could go wrong with any of this? 7, Those children who prove to be robust enough to start learning even before reaching the age of 10 the first principles of the profession for which they have been judged suitable will be sent to the public workshops for several hours every day to begin their apprenticeship. So by 10 years old, every child is going to be assigned a job. They're going to be sent to the workshops. But if you're, ahead of the curve a little bit, you get to go to work early. 8. All children upon reaching the age of 10 will leave the common paternal residence and go into the workshops where they will be housed, fed, and dressed, and where they will be instructed by the masters and chiefs of the various professions, whom they will obey as they would their own parents. They will receive all common treatment in every corps and in every workshop, where the two sexes will be separated and instructed in the occupations that suit them. 9. Did we skip some numbers? No. The masters and mistresses, as well as the chiefs in every profession, will include moral instruction in the technical exercises that they give. As the children begin to develop their rational faculties, some of them will begin to realize that there is a divinity. And having heard people speak of it, they will begin to ask questions about this supreme being. So we're going to deal with God here, and this is not what Karl Marx would have said. In answer to their questions, they will be made to understand that this supreme being is the first and beneficent cause of everything that they admire or find to be lovable and good. Notice that the laws tell you how you're going to tell the children about God. Care will be taken not to give them any vague idea of this ineffable being, nor to pretend to explain his nature with terms that are void of sense. They will be told quite plainly that the author of the universe can be known only by his works, which proclaim him to be nothing other than a being who is infinitely good and wise, and that one cannot compare him to anything mortal. The young people will be made to realize that the feelings of sociability present in a man are the sole oracles of divine intentions, and that it is in observing these sentiments that one can come to realize what a God is. They will be told that the laws are made in order to perfect these sentiments and in order to apply systematically what these sentiments prescribe for the good of society. I would love to see a dystopian movie or novel or show or something depicting this actual program in action. But okay, so there's going to be prescribed in law how you're going to teach kids about God. We have a pretty good case here that this God is a deist. He is the author of the universe. He is the first being and the beneficent cause of everything. And you can tell that only by his works, which just prove that he's infinitely good and infinitely wise. He made the world exactly the way it needs to be. It doesn't actually say deist, though. But you can't compare him to anything mortal. But the most important points, number one, are that there's no personal relationship with this God, right? There's no interaction. This is not Jewish. This is super anti-Jewish. This is very deist. This is not necessarily purely deist. I don't know if they believe that God is remote or not, but certainly the only way you can know God is by his works. There's no relationship and there's no scripture. Imagine telling Jews that there's no Torah to tell them about God. This is not Jewish. This is not Jewish by any stretch. This is ridiculous. Imagine telling Christians that all you get is general revelation and you can't have any special revelation in scripture whatsoever. Sola Scriptura is right out the window for the Protestants. So this isn't Protestant either. You could almost say it's derived from Catholic in a stretch, but not really, because I'm not exactly sure what this represents. Then you're going to tell the young people more. The young people will be made to realize that the feelings of sociability present in man are the sole oracles of divine intentions. So the way that we interact socially are the actual oracles of divine intentions. That's how we actually come to know God, is by the fact that we are communists, that we're sociable, and sociable is all given on the terms of this program. And it is that in observing these sentiments, that is sociability sentiments, that one can come to realize what a God is. They will be told that the laws are made in order to perfect these sentiments. That's literally that the laws of the commune are organized in order to perfect the sentiments of sociability that are the reflection of what a God actually is, and in order to systematically and to apply systematically what these sentiments prescribe for the good of society. 10. All precepts, all maxims, all moral reflections will be derived from the sacred and fundamental laws. That's in caps and in italics, so it refers specifically to a text that these people would be providing or producing. And always with respect to social unity and sympathy. All exhortations will emphasize the happiness of the individual as inseparably linked with the common good. And the people will be encouraged to have the esteem and friendship of their fellow citizens and chiefs as the object of their endeavors. That sounds fantastic. You're not trying to please God, you're trying to please everybody else. And your happiness is inseparably linked with upholding the common good. So that's the totalitarian program. And people will be encouraged to have the esteem and friendship of their fellow citizens and the chiefs as the object of their endeavors. You exist to please each other and your bosses, your chiefs. Not God, not to do the right thing. That's out. All precepts, all maxims, all moral reflections will come from the laws, the sacred and fundamental laws, and nowhere else. And they will always be with respect to social unity and sympathy, which sounds a lot like empathy. 11. The chiefs and senators will watch carefully to see to it that the laws and rules for the education of children are everywhere exactly and uniformly observed, and to see to it above all that those faults of childhood that could tend to develop into the spirit of private ownership are wisely prevented or corrected. They will also prevent the minds of the very young from becoming imbued with any ridiculous myth, tale, or fiction. What a society. I'm telling you, there could be a great dystopia written about this. Laws of study that would prevent all aberrations of the human mind and all unworldly reveries. This is the last section. 1. The number of persons engaged in the sciences and in the arts that demand more sagacity, penetration, concentration, industriousness, and talent than they do physical strength will be determined so many for each brand of study and so many for each city. So you're only going to have so many white-collar workers. The citizens best suited for this type of work, the citizens best suited for work of this type of study will be instructed in it from early age, although this type of study will not exempt them from their term of agricultural work when they reach the age for it. Nobody except for the prescribed number of masters and pupils in the arts and sciences will be permitted to give his time to pursuits of this sort before reaching the age of 30. At that age, any whose experience has perfected their understanding and developed their inclinations in the direction of some pursuit more elevated than the one in which they had been previously engaged will be able to enter the arts or sciences. So the state will identify the people who are going to become arts or sciences, except everybody else has to wait till they're 30 before they're allowed to engage in it at all. And some of them can get engaged in the arts and sciences after 30. 2. There will be absolutely no moral philosophy other than that within the system of laws. This is the precursor to communism and fascism, where Mussolini and Gentile say nothing exists outside the state. There will be absolutely no moral philosophy other than that within the system of laws. The observations and precepts of this science will rest exclusively on the utility and wisdom of these laws, on the satisfactions that come from its ties of blood and friendship, on the mutual service and regard that unite the citizens, on the usefulness of work, on love, on all of the general and special rules of good order and perfect concord. The study of this science will be common to all the citizens. So let me just make very clear that this excludes Torah, this excludes Christian scripture, this excludes everything outside of their socialist utopian law system. This certainly is not Jewish. You aren't going to find Jews who say you're not allowed to study Torah. Just making that real clear. It's also not including real Christians, because you're not going to find Christians who say that you're not allowed to study Scripture. 3. All metaphysics will reduce itself to what was said above concerning the divinity. One paragraph in how you're going to teach kids about God. As for man, it will be pointed out that he is endowed with reason, which is destined to make him sociable. So we're endowed with reason, which is why we're going to be socialists, because we understand that we should be socialists because we're reasonable. See how it works? Doesn't that sound an awful lot like the stuff we've heard from Karl Marx 90 years later? It does. It does. It does. That the nature of his faculties, as well as the natural principles of their operation, are unknown to us, that it is only the processes of this reason that can be observed and followed by the thoughtful application of that same faculty, and that we do not know what constitutes the basis and sustenance of this faculty within us, just as we do not know what becomes of his principle when we die. It could perhaps be said that this principe intelligent subsists even after life, but that is useless to attempt to know that it is, it's a grammar, but that it is useless to attempt to know a condition about which the author of nature has not instructed us in any palpable way. Such would be the prescribed limits of speculation of this sort. So you're not teaching your kids about heaven. You're not teaching your kids about the afterlife in any way whatsoever. All you're going to tell them is that we don't know what happens after we die because nature doesn't tell us. 4. Complete freedom will be allowed to the sagacity and penetration of the human mind in those speculative and experimental sciences that have as their object inquiry either into the secrets of nature or into ways of perfecting the arts useful to society. 5. There will be a sort of public code for all the sciences. Now, he just said there will be complete freedom, but there will be a public code for all the sciences in which nothing beyond the limits prescribed by the laws will ever be added to metaphysics or to morals. Only discoveries in physics, mathematics, or mechanics confirmed by reasoning and experiment will be added to the code. 6. The moral and physical beauty of nature, the objects of the sciences, of the pleasures and satisfactions of living in society, and the honor of citizens who have contributed in a distinguished manner to the perfecting of things will be celebrated in oratory, poetry, and painting. 7. Every local senate will maintain a written record of the activities of chiefs and of citizens worthy of being commemorated, but care will be taken to see that these histories are free of all exaggeration, flattery, and above all falsification. The Supreme Senate will put all these histories together to compose the history of all nation. So we're going to have a ministry of truth, the local senate, and then the Supreme Senate will run that. And 8, last but not least on this document, every chapter of these laws will be engraved separately on the necessary number of columns erected in the public square each city, and their intentions will always be followed according to the proper, direct, and literal sense of the text, this slightest alteration of which will never be permitted. If some obscurity or an ambiguity should be found in any one of the laws, it will be necessary to try to explain it by some other law, or to determine the meaning of this law once and for all in the way most favorable to the principles of the sacred and fundamental laws. So this is the Code of Nature by what's-his-face Morelli, Etienne Gabriel Morelli, a tax official in France, written in 1755. The true spirit of the laws, it says, esprit de ces lois. Okay, what a great document. So where did communism come from? This is where communism came from. You can see almost everything in communism here. And like I said, this was the target for the structure that Gracchus Babeuf wanted to manifest in the mid-1790s. So this is 1755. 40 years later, Gracchus Babeuf, following pieces of the French Revolution, is trying to figure out how to make a society based on this. But Gracchus Babeuf was a revolutionary communist. He realized, just like it says at the beginning of this, that you can't actually just do that. People don't want to do it. It says that where does it say that it's basically impossible to install this at the beginning? I am giving a sketch of the laws as a sort of appendix, Morelli says, outside of the body of the work itself, since it is unfortunately all too true that to form a republic of this sort, this perfect utopian socialist republic, would be just about impossible at the present time. Well, 42 years later to be specific, in 1797, after the French Revolution, it was still impossible. But the French Revolution, some revolutionaries felt like it might have opened some doors. But there was a missing ingredient: force, terror, violence. And so this is where we come to Gracchus Babeuf's, the second document I want to read to you from, Gracchus Babeuf's Conspiracy of the Equals. So the French Revolution has raged. This guy's a Jacobin sympathizer. He sees what Robespierre and the others, the other branches that are even more violent, are doing, thinks this is how we can install this. So he creates in February of 1796, I'm sorry, not 1797, 1796, February of 1796, he creates the Conspiracy of Equals. In May of 1796, the conspiracy is destroyed. It does not last very long. They are hanged not too long, or beheaded maybe not too long later. So one of his conspirators in the Conspiracy of the Equals, which was meant to install the program we just heard about, that was the idea of the ideal utopian communism we just heard about, the Code of Nature from Etienne Gabriel Morelli, 1755. Now we have the Manifesto of Equals, written by Babeuf's sidekick in the conspiracy, Sylvain Maréchal. So this is written in 1796. It is considered a document in historical anarcho-communism. And this is the other piece. So the story up to this point is you have Gracchus Babeuf, the father of revolutionary communism. Here we are in 1796. So we are, 52 years before the Communist Manifesto. He's 41 years out from this idea of this perfect communist society put forth by this tax collector that he found very inspiring. All French, no Jews. And what they realize is they need a revolution, and they need a conspiracy, and that conspiracy needs to be revolutionary, and it needs the violence that we saw and they used in the French Revolution, that the Jacobins did, and then they can make this work, and they write their manifesto, the Manifesto of Equals. So now you have, there was the theory, now you're going to have the praxis. How are you going to get there? So a lot of people like to say, oh, well, Moses Hess told Karl Marx that you have to be practical and blah, blah, blah. Or that, one of Karl Marx's great inventions was to break from the idea from Hegel and to move to the practical, to the action, to the activism or praxis. But this was the kind of stuff that was circulating in the French secret societies, including the League of the Just, that Marx was trafficking in, including the Communist Correspondence League that Marx was sharing letters in. This was the stuff that was being talked about in French socialist salons and in Belgian socialist salons that Marx was trafficking in. These are the kinds of ideas that were asking the question of, okay, we know what we want, and you just heard what that is. How do we get it? And the answer is revolutionary violence. So that's the other piece, revolutionary violence. So Marx is a revolutionary communist. Did Marx know about this Manifesto of Equals? Yes. Did he know about the Conspiracy of the Equals? Yes. He praised it. This was the model from which he drew, and you're going to hear that in the Manifesto of Equals by Sylvain Maréchal, 1796. People of France, it begins. For 15 centuries you lived as slaves and consequently unhappy. For the last 6 years you barely breathe, waiting for independence, freedom, and equality. So this is quite the opening, right, to their manifesto. And he's talking about during the French Revolution, the last 6 years. 15 centuries you lived as slaves and consequently unhappy. For the last 6 years you barely breathe, waiting for independence, freedom, and equality. Equality! All caps, big exclamation mark. The first wish of nature, the first need of man, the first bond of all legitimate association, people of France. Equality is the first wish of nature? What? Like at the end of the heat death of the universe? Is that what you're talking about? Are we talking about some thermodynamics here? When everything is completely degraded and there's no order? Order is literally the creation of inequality. The first need of man is equality? The hell it is. The first bond of all legitimate association. That word legitimate's doing an awful lot of work there. But otherwise, what is there? There's a power dynamic, right? If there's not equality in the association, there must be a power dynamic. People of France, he beseeches, you were not more blessed than the other nations that vegetate on this unfortunate globe. Everywhere and at all times, the poor human race delivered over to more or less deft cannibals, served as a plaything for all ambitions, as prey for all tyrannies. Everywhere and at all times, men were lulled with beautiful words. At no time and in no place was the thing itself ever obtained along with the word. So what you hear is talking, words, ideas. Don't get the job done. You need something else. In no place, in no time was the thing itself ever obtained along with the words. You hear the beautiful words, people talk, they have ideas, their philosophies, their passionate speeches, their rhetoric. But in no time and in no place was the thing itself ever obtained along with the word. From time immemorial, Maréchal says, they hypocritically repeat to us, all men are equal. And from time immemorial, the most degrading and monstrous inequality insolently weighs upon the human race. That kind of sounds like Marx in certain ways, by the way. As long as there have been human societies, the most beautiful of humanity's privileges has been recognized without contradiction, but was only once put in practice. Equality was nothing but a beautiful and sterile legal fiction. Doesn't this sound like the same critical theory that we hear today from the woke? It does. Okay, so this weighs upon the human race. This really strikes of Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. I think I already closed that document. I had a ton of these documents like permanently open on my computer so I could refer to them, but I've closed that one. I'm not going to go find it again. But that's where he says that the weight of the past generations weighs on men like the nightmare or something like is the nightmare of the living, something like that. The weight of all dead generations weighs upon men like a nightmare or something. And what's the problem? From time immemorial, they hypocritically repeat to us all men are equal, even though they don't believe it, right? So that's the problem. And equality is nothing but a beautiful but sterile legal fiction. So what's the problem? This sounds exactly like the left today, and it sounds exactly like the communists in the 1850s. It says, and now that is called for with even a stronger voice. Now that it is called for with an even stronger voice, the answer is be quiet, you wretches. Real equality is nothing but a chimera. Be satisfied with conditional equality. You're all equal before the law. What more do you want, filthy rabble? Legislators, rulers, rich landowners. Well, it's your turn to listen. Okay, so he's like, look, you said we're equal. All you mean is we're equal before the law, and what's that? You legislators, you rulers, you rich landowners, it is now your turn to listen. Are we not equal, he says? This principle remains uncontested because unless touched by insanity, one can't seriously say it is night when it is day. So he's obviously we are not equal is what he's saying. Well then, we aspire to live and die equal, the way we were born. We want real equality or death. This is what we need. And we'll have this real equality at whatever the cost, he says. Woe on those who stand between it and us. Woe on those who resist a wish so firmly expressed. So they're going to make real equality where everybody's equal, like in the vision we just read, or else woe to you. Woe to you if you get in our way. Because what they have is utopian vision, that they think that they found the foundation of who human beings are. You heard that in the previous document, and you hear this here. The first wish of nature, the first need of man, the first bond of all legitimate association is equality. This is communism, ladies and gentlemen. This is what it means. This is what it looks like. The French Revolution, he says, is nothing but the precursor of another revolution, one that will be greater, more solemn, and which will be the last. That's a Marxist line, but it's being delivered 30 years before Marx was born. How can that be? The people marched over the bodies of kings and priests who were in league against it. It will do the same to the new tyrants, the new political Tartuffes seated in the place of the old. What do we need? He asks, beside equality of rights. We need not only that equality of rights written into the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, we want it in our midst, under the roofs of our houses. We consent to everything for it. We consent to everything to achieve. We consent to murder. We consent to genocide. We consent to terrorism. We consent to everything for it, to make a clean slate so that we hold to it alone. Let all the arts perish if need be, as long as real equality remains. We'll destroy everything as long as it's equal. This is psychotic, but this is communism. This is revolutionary communism. This is the manifesto of the conspiracy of the equals that was the first attempt at revolutionary communism, that was the inspiration for Marx, that was the model that was carried forth to the League of the Outlaws and then to the League of the Just, that became the Communist League after it came together with the Communist Correspondence League, that was writing the letters and that was doing the salons, that was trafficking in these ideas through the intervening 50 years. We consent to everything for it, to make a clean slate so that we hold to it alone. Hold to equality alone. Nothing else matters but equality. Nothing else matters. Let all the arts perish, he says, and the people too, really, right? If need be, as long as real equality remains. Legislators and politicians, Marischal writes, you have no more genius than you do good faith. Gutless and rich landowners, in vain do you attempt to neutralize our holy enterprise by saying they do nothing but reproduce that agrarian law asked for more than once in the past. Slanderers, be silent, and in the silence of your confusion, listen to our demands dictated by nature and based on justice. The agrarian law, or the partitioning of land, was the spontaneous demand of some unprincipled soldiers, of some towns moved more by their instinct than by reason. We lean toward something more sublime and more just, the common good, or the community of property. Communism. No more individual property in the land. The land belongs to no one. We demand, we want, the common enjoyment of the fruits of the land. The fruits belong to all, which is honestly that the fruits belong to none. We declare that we can no longer put up with the fact that the great majority of work and sweat for the smallest of minorities. Sorry, I said that wrong. We declare that we can no longer put up with the fact that the great majority work and sweat for the smallest of minorities. So there you have the same sentiment as you have with Marx. You have the small minority of the capitalists and the bourgeoisie and the large mass of proletarian workers who work and sweat for the benefit of the smallest of minorities, the owners. Long enough, they say, and for too long, less than 1 million individuals have disposed of that which belongs to 20 million of their kind, their equals. So the peasant is equal to the lord. So 1 million or so of the upper class have taken advantage of or disposed of that which actually belongs to 20 million of their kind, who are their equals, meaning the peasants and the workers. He says, let it at last end, this great scandal that our descendants will never believe existed. Disappear at last revolting distinctions between rich and poor, great and small, masters and servants, rulers and ruled. If you were Karl Marx, you would say patricians and plebeians, or in a word, oppressor and oppressed. You would actually say that because it's on the first page of the Communist Manifesto. And by the way, this is Sylvain Marischal writing this, but the fact is that he was writing this for the Conspiracy of Equals with Gracchus Babeuf, and Gracchus Babeuf's code name, Gracchus, his real name being Francois Noël. Francois Noël Babeuf took the code name, or the secret society name, Gracchus, and Gracchus refers to the Gracchi in the Roman Empire who believed that the patricians should be robbed to give to the plebeians. Basically kind of a socialist story. So he took his code name within secret society lingos on the Jacobins had all these code names too, did this in line with the idea of stealing from the rich to give to the poor because everybody's actually equal. All right. So The Communist Manifesto just repeats this line, guys. It doesn't quote it, but it's the same idea. He says, let there no longer be any difference between people than that of age and sex. Since all have the same faculties and all the same needs, let there then be for them but one education, but one nourishment. Are they satisfied with one son and one heir for all? Why then would the same portion of the same quality of food not suffice for each of them? So the only things that are going to differentiate human beings are age and sex. That's it. Let there no longer be any difference between people than that of age and sex. That's it. Every other difference is irrelevant and fake. Everybody else is equal. Already the enemies, he says, of the most natural order of things we can imagine raise a clamor against us. He's like, oh yeah, people aren't going to like this because this is the most natural order. It's actually not. Hierarchy is, and they want to obliterate hierarchy. But oh, that's what they must hate us because we're saying the truth and they don't want to hear it, but they're not saying the truth. They say to us, you are disorganizers and seditious. You want nothing but massacres and loot. Sounds like they had their number. People of France, we won't waste our time responding to them. We tell you, the holy enterprise that we are organizing has no other goal than that of putting an end to civil dissension and public poverty. And so here we have it again, right? We're not even going to answer these accusations that we are seditious disorganizers that want nothing but massacres and loot, which turns out to actually be true. So we're not even going to answer. We're just going to talk to you, people of France. We're not even going to answer them. We're going to tell you what we're doing is a holy enterprise, and it only has one goal: putting an end to civil dissension and public poverty. No. You said private property. Okay, so that's not true, but their theory is the same as the other guys, that if you get rid of private property, you get rid of all the basis for public dissension and all the basis for poverty, because if nobody owns anything, nobody's actually poor, because everybody owns everything in common and nobody has more than anybody else, and poverty is a relative status. Never before, he says, has more vast a plan been conceived or carried out. So they have this grand vision for themselves. Of course, the Marxists said the same thing about theirs. Here and there, a few men of genius, a few wise men have spoken in a low and trembling voice. None have had the courage to tell the whole truth. This is how the Communist Manifesto ends too. The moment for great measures has arrived, Maréchal says. Evil has reached its height. It covers the face of the earth. Under the name of politics, chaos has reigned for too many centuries. Let everything be set in order and take its proper place once again. Let the supporters of justice and happiness organize in the voice of equality. The moment has come to found the Republic of Equals, Communist Republic, the great home open to all men. So the moment has come to found the Republic of Equals, the great home open to all men, they say. Except in the other one, they had to build a prison outside for the people that didn't want to participate according to the really weird, strict rules and laws, right? The day of general restitution has arrived. There will be reparations. Families moaning and suffering come sit at the common table set by nature for all its children. So this is your birthright. Equality is your birthright. If you're having a bad time, if you're dispossessed, join our cause. Come be our soldiers for this ruinous, disorganizing, seditious, massacre, looting program. People of France, he beseeches them again. The purest of all glories was thus reserved for you. Yes, it is you who should be the first to offer the world this touching spectacle. So notice he's saying nobody's tried communism before. Okay? This communism is reserved for you, French, people of France. It is you who should be the first to offer the world this touching spectacle. So are we supposed to believe that communism is Jewish, or are we supposed to believe that it's French? Because it's the French that are supposed to be offering the world this touching spectacle of a revolutionary, violent, terror-driven communist program. Ancient habits, he says, antique fears would again like to pose an obstacle to the establishment of the Republic of Equals. Now just swap that out for communism, and you have your understanding. The organization of real equality, the actual equality is what they called it in the Soviet Union. The organization of real equality, the only one that responds to all needs without causing any victims, without costing any sacrifice, will not at first please everyone. The selfish, the ambitious will tremble with rage. Those who possess unjustly will cry out about injustice. Marx ripped all this off. This is the same stuff Marx said. The loss of the enjoyments of the few, of solitary pleasures, of personal ease will cause lively regret to those heedless of the pain of others. Sounds just like Hassan Piker, frankly, or Karl Marx. The lovers of absolute power, the henchmen of arbitrary authority, will with difficulty bow their superb heads before the level of real equality. Their short-sightedness will penetrate with difficulty the imminent future of common happiness. But what can a few thousand malcontents do against a mass of happy men, surprised to have sought so long a happiness that they had right at hand? The day after this real revolution, they'll say with astonishment, "What? Common happiness was so easy to obtain? All we had to do was want it? Why, oh why didn't we desire it sooner? Do they really have to make us speak of it so many times? Yes, without a doubt, one lone man on earth, richer, stronger than his like, than his equals, and the balance is thrown off. Crime and unhappiness are on earth." Listen to that. So first of all, he's claiming that the second that they have their communist revolution and we actually have communism, first you're going to have a lot of people who don't want to have it. They're going to throw a fit. But what can a few thousand mad people do against the massive millions of people who actually want pure equality? And then the day after this revolution, he says, they're going to be like, whoa, we could have had a better world all along. Wow, all we had to do is want it. Wow. That's literally what it says. Like, that's so retarded. Okay. But then that last sentence here, and this isn't the last sentence of the document, this is the last section of this sentence of this section, is chilling as hell. Yes, without a doubt, one lone man on earth, richer, stronger than his like, than his equals, and the balance is thrown off, crime and unhappiness are on earth. All it takes is one person with slightly more. Without a doubt, he says. All it takes is one person in the whole world, one lone man on earth, it says, who is richer or stronger than his equals. Throws off the whole balance, and crime and unhappiness are everywhere. So the only way it can work, and all these people will be like, after this revolution that achieves this, everybody will be like, wow, all we had to do was want this and we would have it. Wow. All it takes is one person who's slightly better off than anybody else, and you're right back in the fray. Imagine what it's going to take to make sure everybody is kept equal. This is where you start getting these dark novels like Kurt Vonnegut's Harrison, how do you pronounce it? Bergeron or whatever, where you have the handicapper general who's going to make sure you have perfect actual equality or equity. You're going to make sure that the people who are more talented are handicapped somehow. You're going to make sure that the people who are smarter have annoying sounds playing so that they're constantly distracted and irritated and so on. Dark, real dark. People of France, Maréchal writes, by what sign will you now recognize the excellence of a constitution? That which rests in its eternity on real equality is the only one that can suit you and fulfill all your wishes. The aristocratic charters of 1791 and 1795 tightened your chains instead of breaking them. That of 1793 was a great step toward true equality, and we had never before approached it so closely. But it did not yet touch the goal, nor reach common happiness, which it nevertheless solemnly consecrated as its great principle. People of France, open your eyes and your hearts to the fullness of happiness. Recognize and proclaim with us the Republic of Equals. So, where did communism come from? That's the document. It's available in the Anarchist Library. The other document that I read from the Code of Nature from Morelli is available. The excerpt that I read is available on Marxists.org. Where did communism come from? These two documents are central. They are the vision and the implementation manifesto of the Conspiracy of Equals, which was organized by Gracchus Babeuf in the 1790s, and specifically the Conspiracy of Equals was in 1796 is when it happened. They were executed in 1797 for this idiocy. Karl Marx drew his inspiration from it. The League of the Outlaws and the League of the Just, which were originally some of these radical left French revolutionaries who survived and escaped, combined primarily with the remnants of the German Illuminati. The League of Outlaws was actually literally the remnants of the German Illuminati that had been destroyed after it plotted to kill the Prussian king, or Bavarian king. I'm not sure which one. Bavarian king, probably. It was organized specifically as a esoteric secret society, drawing all these mystical things together in their vision of the world as an answer to the Rosicrucians, as an opposition to the Rosicrucians, who are another mystical society. It was called the Rosy Cross. It was not Jewish, by the way. It was rooted on Christian ideas. And so was the Bavarian Illuminati, but in a different way. And so the League of Outlaws traffics in these precise ideas in the early 1800s. It becomes called the League of the Just, or the League of Just Men. Sometimes even the Justice League, which sounds like the comic book thing, doesn't it? And they spin off the Communist League by joining together with the Communist Correspondence League, which was what Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were partly responsible for helping to organize, because they were caught up in these very ideas. That would have been in 1847 that the Communist League comes into being. So they were caught up in these ideas where they had picked them up in French salons and Belgian salons and in correspondence, and in reading these utopian socialists, including Morelli, but also including people like Proudhon and Saint-Simon. These are all either Catholics or lapsed Catholics, by the way. There's no Jews in this story. But we can read these documents from 1755 in France, from 1796 in France, and we can hear exactly the Communist Manifesto and exactly the Communist vision and see how it was actually implemented. Where did communism come from? It came from here. And we don't even need any of that esoteric mysticist stuff. We don't need even the young Hegelian parts to understand that the vision and the practical maneuvering was here. The only thing that the Hegelian part and the mysticism added was that Karl Marx believed that communism to really work, because this failed, he looked at this with praise, but said it was crude communism and it was low level and it failed because it failed to do a couple of things. Number one, it failed to understand the dialectical nature of history, which is the mysticism that I've called socio-Gnosticism. You could call it socio-esotericism if you're having a problem with the G word there. And so it's failing to incorporate the dialectical, quote-unquote, science of history. It's not a science. And it fails to be sufficiently materialist enough, and it failed, in fact, in his regard later, to be ruthless enough in making sure that you expropriate those expropriators who are actually going to like what you're doing even less. The vehicle by which this all came from Babeuf forward was one of Babeuf's other collaborators, this guy Buonarroti. Buonarroti maintained Babeuf's ideas and documented them and wrote them and maintained these documents and passed them on eventually through these salons and to these other utopian socialists in the circles that Marx and Engels trafficked, and eventually into the League of the Outlaws and the League of the Just and the Communist League specifically. They made their way. But Buonarroti is specifically recognized as being one of the vehicles by which it made it into the League of Outlaws, which eventually becomes the Communist Party in 1848, when it declares itself in a manifesto that is shockingly similar in many ways to the Manifesto of Equals, written almost 50 years, actually more than 50 years earlier, 52 years earlier, by Sylvain Maréchal, coming out of the backside of the French Revolution from a very radical leftist branch. And like I said, just to be crude about it, no Jews in sight, guys. No Jews in sight. So we can confront the idea that lines of Kabbalistic mysticism wove their way into some of the thinking. We can definitely appreciate the fact that there is other tracts of mysticism. We can go back to Provence and look at the milieu that the Crusaders brought back of mystical thinking, and we can talk about how those things influenced various strains during the Enlightenments, plural Enlightenments, and how those ideas influenced this French utopian socialist and revolutionary thinking. But we can also look at the influences of not just Enlightenment interpretations of deism, but also of Christian thought and Christian social justice society. A lot of this arising in France, by the way, from lapsed Catholics, not active Catholics in most cases. A lot of the active Catholics were explicitly opposed to all of this, by the way. They were like your Joseph de Maistre, who was like, this kind of proto-Nazi, proto-fascist figure, who is on the right side versus the left side of the National Assembly during the French Revolution. He was directly in the counter-revolutionary camp, opposed to all these leftist lunatics. So where did communism come from? That's your question. This is some information. We go back to 1755 France, 1796 France, well before we get any of the major German influence, well before Karl Marx, and we see Karl Marx's, we'll call it source material, all over the place.